Hi, I'm Ruth Osbourne and I'm going to be taking you through a simple mark making workshop. This is going to be about using materials that you can easily source, so from around your house, from a garden, from a local park. It's all about using what you can easily gather together. And we're going to explore using some basic materials, how we can make some beautiful marks that are playful and help us explore our own creativity. This activity is about switching off. It's about relaxing, it's about exploring, it's about silencing your inner critic and putting all your doubts to one side and just getting lost in the mark making process. Hopefully you'll find it relaxing and enjoyable. What I'm going to do is take you through what materials we're using and show you some of the objects that I've gathered together, and then I'll show you how you can use those objects to start doing some mark making. As I said, it's a really meditative process, so hopefully you can use this as part of relaxation techniques, creative processes, or perhaps even as part of mindfulness practice. I'll also show you at the end what you can do with some of the marks that you've made in terms of making them into little artworks in their own right. But it really is about exploring the process and allowing yourself the freedom to be creative. So we'll get started. So first of all, I'm going to take you through some of the materials that you will need for doing the mark making. Now, this is just a selection of materials that I've chosen. There's lots of adaptations that you can make. So you're going to need something to put your paint or your ink on. So I've got a little tray here, but anything that's sort of a flat surface or anything that has kind of a flat surface with sides is perfectly fine. So even a paper plate would be perfect. I'm going to be using some block printing ink. This is available from lots of art shops or online art stores. And I'm going to be using it a little bit like paint today. You could also use acrylic paint for what we're doing. You're going to need some water and a little brush. And I've also got a sponge here. I've also brought along an ink pad that you would use with a rubber stamp. And I'm just using black ink today. But of course, when you're doing this yourself, you can use whatever colours of ink that you would like. I've also got some cartridge paper, and as you can see here, I've just sort of ruled it into a simple grid. But you can, of course, use any type of paper. You could use tissue paper, newspaper, old envelopes, old pages from books, sugar paper, anything really that you kind of want to work with or that you have to hand. So those are the materials that we're going to be using. I also need a selection of items for actually doing the mark making. So this art mark making is all inspired by the idea of gather. So bringing together items that we can make interesting patterns and textures with. So along that theme of gather, I've kept it to what you can easily find around the house. But you can, of course, expand this out into using whatever objects that you think might be interesting. So I've got some little leaves that I've gathered. I've got a little cotton bud. I've got a lid from some oat milk. I've got a little branch, twig, little coffee stirrer, bit of Duplo, a match. I have here a panko, some bubble wrap, and I've also brought along a little stamping block that I've made. So this is a piece of wood, and onto it, just using PVA glue, I've glued some string, and I've also put on some little kind of stickers, little foam stickers that I've just cut into semicircles. So those are all the items that we're going to use for exploring our mark making. And I'll take you through using both the block printing ink and also the rubber stamp pad. So we'll start off by getting our ink ready. So it's quite thick for using with some of these objects. I'm just going to loosen it ever so slightly and spread it out a bit with a little bit of water from the brush. There we go. And I'm going to use this tray for actually putting the ink onto the objects. So to get started, I'm going to just work with my little bit of Duplo. So we've got kind of 3 kind of key areas for making marks with the Duplo: the bottom, the top and the side. And we'll get lots of different marks depending on which part of the block that we use. So I'm just stamping the Duplo block down into the ink, getting a nice little layer there on the top. And I'm just going to start to, not even really thinking about the placement, build up a nice little selection of marks going over and over. Don't forget, this is just about sort of switching off, not really thinking too much. Just trying to let yourself be creative and decide kind of what you find visually pleasing. Lots of lovely marks there. If I move on to using the stamp pad, you will get messy, so I should have said perhaps a cloth or some wipes for cleaning your hand. So now we're going to try using the bottom. And again, just combining all these lovely marks. And exploring each object. Once you've filled a square, you can also then think about layering. So maybe I'd like to go and use some of the ink, which might give me a darker mark, and layering that in amongst the marks that I've used the stamp pad with. So I'm not worrying too much about placement, just really letting myself explore. So I've used my Duplo block and I filled a lovely space on my sheet. So now I'm going to move on to looking at my little pine cone. And just the same process, dabbing it into the ink. If you wanted, you could get your brush or your sponge and dab it on so you're getting a layer that is slightly more spread out. It's starting to get messy. I'm going to keep stamping until I run out of ink and then add more. You can also try different methods of making the mark, so dragging, creating circles and spirals, anything that you think you find visually interesting. And fill all the space. There's no right or wrong. So don't look at any of your marks and think, oh dear, that's not worked out. Because it's just about exploring for yourself what you find visually satisfying. Working with the leaf, I'm going to, as you can see here, brush a little bit of ink onto my leaf. This is just a leaf from the garden. I think the plant's called Cotoneaster. And as you can see, I can get some really nice little marks from that leaf. This is a fresh leaf, it's not been dried or pressed. And I'll just keep going with it, seeing what I can get and how the marks change. I'm not applying any extra ink to this. Now when you work with foliage, of course, you will find that some leaves take the ink better than others. So that's a bit of trial and error. As you can see, I haven't had to reapply any ink yet and I'm still getting lovely marks. They're getting fainter, but I'm still getting all the lovely marks from the veins and the shape of the leaf. Maybe I'll try using the front of the leaf. I was using the back there, so I'll try using the front. See how it differs. So it's really about exploring. Yep, that's quite different. And letting your mind kind of take you in different directions I might also try my oak leaf in the same little section there. So I'm going to get a wee bit more water on my brush, spread my ink out again, and apply a nice little layer. Not too thick, not too light either. And my ink really is still quite thick, you know, it's not gone into like a watercolour texture yet. So just spread that out. I'm going to put my leaf down here in my empty space and just press it down. Try not to let it move. Just applying pressure to see what sort of mark I can get from it. There we go. Some lovely veins there. I could probably get another little mark there in that space. There we go. Then in terms of the bubble wrap, it's the same sort of process. For it, I think I'll work with the ink pad. And you'll find yourself what inks you like using. Maybe you prefer using the ink pad, maybe you prefer using paint, maybe you prefer mixing up different colours. Really, once you've got an idea of the process, there's lots and lots of ways that you can add to this. You can even add in some mark making with pencil to add little details. But I like to mark make with objects because it's always surprising to see what results you can get. So I really like the bubble wrap. I think it's worked really well. Now I'm going to take the little cotton bud again onto the stamp pad or the ink pad. I'm going to combine the little dots that I can get from it with my slightly darker ink, and they're going to be combined with the marks from the bubble wrap. So I really don't have a plan for these marks. I'm just letting them evolve. Because these are all materials that are just easily found, this is the type of thing that you can do on the go as well. If you had a sketchbook and an ink pad, you can mark make anywhere. You don't have to be indoors at a table. Might want to have a little packet of wipes with you just in case you get a little bit messy. So I'm sort of drawing with my little cotton bud now. Just letting it make these soft little details. Great. And then I'll also have a go with my little spatula that you get. So what I've done there is I've just sort of snapped it and I'm pressing it onto the ink. It's quite a light little mark, which is very nice. And then where it's snapped, I'm going to delve into my slightly wetter ink. And make some little drawn scratchy marks with it. And not really worrying too much about how regular they are, how much ink I have, or even really where they're going. Great. So I've nearly filled my page. Turn it round. I've just got a couple more squares to fill. So what I'm going to do now is look at my stamping block that I've made. So as you can see here, I've used some little foam stickers cut into semicircles, and as I said, I've glued down some string with PVA glue. The stamp pad is probably going to be the best for working with it. And I'll start with my little stickers. And again, just stamping. And then do a wee bit of painting just to sort of see what the mark is like from that. It's slightly darker. And then my string, again, I could use the stamp pad or the ink on my ink tray. Brushing on a light layer and just letting that layer up. Overlapping. Great. I've also got my little lid here from my oat or almond milk, but you could use obviously any lid from a jar. And it's giving me a really nice effect. You can also use vegetables, so a leek, carrots, cut a mushroom in half. There's lots and lots of options. Quite like the little oat milk lid. A match. Again, stamping down. Very light little line it's giving me. That's nice. I'll grab a leek so I can show you what it would look like. Now I cut this and I let it dry for about an hour before stamping with it. It's almost like the rings of a tree. There we go. So as a really simple activity, you can see I filled my page with lots of beautiful marks, lots of experiments there. If you had a sketchbook, you could just be filling your sketchbook with lots of different marks like this. Doesn't have to have a purpose, doesn't have to have an end result. It's about exploring the process. But actually, in a sketchbook, all of your marks can look very visually interesting. So if I show you this little concertina sketchbook, you can see I've got lots and lots of beautiful marks in there. And it makes like a lovely record. So you could make little annotations about where the marks were made or what was used to make the marks. And of course, let's not forget that even if you don't want to use these objects, even just something simple like a brush and some watered down paint or ink can make some really lovely marks. Try the sponge here. And this might spark ideas for something that you want to explore further. So once you have finished your mark making, you'll be left with either a little sketchbook or lots of pieces of paper with all these gorgeous marks. Now these are all just monochrome because I just used black ink, but if you're using lots of different colours of ink, they could be bright, colourful papers. Now in terms of mark making, I always think it's more about the process. It's about switching off your busy mind, relaxing and being creative and playful. But it is sometimes nice to do something with all these lovely papers that you've made, particularly if you don't work in a sketchbook. So I'm really quickly going to show you how you can make a lovely little collage. So what I've done is just put some double-sided acid-free sticky tape on a little piece of cardboard. But doesn't have to be acid-free double-sided sticky tape. You could just also use PVA glue. And I've torn up my big sheet of paper into 6 little squares. Now I can use scissors or I can use a ruler to start to chop up and cut out perhaps some of the marks that I really like from my papers and start to build up a collage. I'm not going to worry too much about the placement of these. I am not going to lay out a composition first. I'm going to just start to cut and tear and let my sort of intuition, for want of a better description, decide where everything is going to go. If I decide I want to place pieces, so the ends are coming off over the side, I'll be trimming them towards the end. So I'm really not going to let myself worry too much about what looks good, what doesn't look good, what looks kind of balanced. I'm just going to let myself explore what this collage could look like. Now you could cut out shapes as well. I'm just sticking to rectangles and strips, but you could cut out shapes if you wanted to. So I've got lots of raw edges. I'm going to take my scissors and just trim along so I can tidy that all up. And then you could pop that in a wee box frame if you wanted, fix it to a bit of mount board, or just display it. So there you go. You've got a lovely collage finished. And of course, if you are working in a sketchbook, then you have your beautiful sketchbook that you can annotate with notes and build up your marks in. So hopefully that's given you a bit of inspiration about how you can do some lovely mark making processes using whatever you can find around the house or in your garden or a local park, and using materials like ink, rubber stamp blocks, sponges and brushes that are easy to access. So thanks very much for joining in, and happy mark making.